Hello, everyone. It is our live stream for, what was it, February 6th,
February 6th.
2022. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. What is this? The third day of the 2022 Winter Olympic Games? In case that's important to anybody.
I haven't been watching any of it.
I mean, if the Chinese Communist Party is watching, they'll be pleased that we've taken note of their fabulous home show. So, I'm a big fan of the Olympics. I've always liked it. In particular, I like the opening ceremony stuff, but I like the variety of sports. Not a huge fan of most mainstream sports. I enjoy them when I watch them, but it's not something I go out of my way to do. So when the Olympics comes about, there's some cool stuff. Luge, crazy people hopping on a sled, doing crazy things. And then you have it all the way at the other end of the spectrum where it's like curling. Absolutely athletic, but very much a strategy game. And the pacing is relatively considered, right? Then you've got stuff like biathlon. Let's throw some cross country skis on, get ourselves winded, and then try to shoot accurately and quickly.
Yeah, well, that was a practical skill.
Was. Interestingly enough, it's one of the few actually combat oriented things that's left in the Olympics. Largely the Olympics were founded around skills that were useful for soldiers to have.
Yeah.
So, and we preserve some of that in the summer games still. We still have archery. We still have javelin and hammer throw. And of course, we've got wrestling and the modern judo and that kind of thing. But there's not really a lot of modern weaponry apart from biathlon. So, it's the modern day equivalent for what would have been, to some extent, the equivalent in ancient Greece, right? So I think it's an interesting concept because of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, that has basically zero to do with IT operations.
Yeah, that has absolutely zero to do with IT operations.
I was looking back at some of our notes about things to discuss, and one that popped out to me is some stuff around security. We've touched on security topics multiple times, and initially we had some things that we came up with that. Thank you. Is that better?
It was way up in your face, and that one has a pretty obnoxious muff.
It does. I mean, well, I won't make any comments about that. No, one of the things that I've always thought would be interesting is to discuss everybody's got security problems, right? And some people are better at security than others. I think it's probably more common on the networking side of operations to have a security mindset, because the network operations folks typically are working with isolation, filtering, firewalling on a far more regular basis than most traditionally systems people.
And
right?
the role of firewall stuff and security stuff before it became its own thing, and still in a lot of places, falls on the networking team.
Right. Interestingly enough, it has very much been on the system side where kind of the forefront of security is, which is around identity, right? Directory services, that kind of thing has been a systems task for the most part. And a lot of movement today around security involves credentials and control of credentials and things like that. But there's that question for people that I know we're bad at security, but it's say an exec comes to you and says, is our security good? I mean, the inevitable answer, I think for a lot of companies is going to be not as good as it needs to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Not as good as we tell you.
Hopefully you're honest about those things and clear. There's a lot of businesses that have made decisions for good. It's a bad security decision, right? And from a business standpoint, though, there's more to that goes into it than just security. There's cost, there's disruption. Like if you have $10 to spend and fixing your security problems is going to cost 5 of them, $5 doesn't leave a lot to spend on your business.
Well,
Right?
absolutely. Well, and there's always been a certain level of pragmatism involved in the balance between
Sure.
security and getting the job done. Because the most secure system on the planet is turned off and unplugged.
Right.
It's, however, that's not practical. Yeah, business gots to business.
Right.
So how are you going to do that in the best way possible?
Exactly. And so, the thing that I think it would be interesting to talk through is how do you get started? Like, what's an easy, quick win? For the people that like, if we come up with 5 or 6 easy, quick wins, and there are people out there that are like, "Yep, got all those boxes checked." Like, you're in better shape than like.
Yeah.
You're probably not as good a shape as you want to be because like you should always be striving for improvement. But there's absolutely going to be people out there like, oh yeah, I should totally do that. So like for you on the networking side, what's the quickest, easiest, cheapest thing you can do day one to start eating that big security elephant one bite at a time?
Honestly, one of the best things to do is pretty much every vendor, well, many vendors, they'll have some concept of a BPA that you can run against your
Sure.
configs. Usually free. Run it. Find out what's on there. You may have some surprises or maybe some low hanging fruit that they'll point out that you can fix. I mean, the other thing is start looking at old legacy configs on switches and routers because these things kind of change over time. And if you're not really good about maintaining those templates and making sure that every piece of equipment is up to snuff, you may have old, insecure, non-preferred configs. Even just things like SNMP, just unencrypted, or you may be doing, say, Radius, and there was some old piece of equipment for some reason you needed it to do an unencrypted exchange type. Do you still have it set up that way? Some places do. A lot of places do. So it's just going through. Look at all the old stuff that nobody's looked at forever. That's where the gremlins are going to hide.
Interesting enough, that actually is almost perfect parity with what I would say on the system side. Best practices analyzers, a lot, particularly on the OS side, those absolutely exist. They are free to run. Sometimes they are a little more challenging or esoteric than you might want them to be, but like it at least gives you an idea of what you're looking at. And the other thing is update your old stuff, right? Like obviously, if you've got a 2003 server or heaven forbid a 2000 server sitting out there, that's not secure. And while you might think, oh, nobody's, security through obscurity, nobody's gonna hit that anymore.
I'm not that important. Well, you know what? They want your money more than anything else.
Right. And
they don't care what business line you're in. They don't care how big or how small you are.
And the exploit packages, for them, it's like, there's a super easy exploit that I can include in my deployment package that's going to cover all these old systems. Of course they're going to do it.
Oh, yeah.
They've already paid the money to get their exploit kit or write the exploit kit. Of course they're going to do it. Like your 2000 system is just as vulnerable as your 2008 R2 system, which theoretically you can still get Microsoft patches for if you pay the money. But there's that old system, but also like make sure you're doing the work to keep your core systems up to date. Like, are you running an old version of AD? Is your functional level set up? You will find, obviously you want to be careful with this because there's always surprises in the systems world, particularly in like the Windows systems world. But you're going to find that probably 98, 99% of your Windows software does not care what your domain looks like from a domain functional level, or what version of Windows your domain controllers are running on. And running your core identity, credentials and rights system, being up to date and well patched is a really easy way to make sure your systems are secure. Like if that's secure, the rest of the exploits become a lot harder.
Yeah, definitely.
So, so once you get those basics done, once you're ferreting out your old configs, you're maybe putting some practice in place around like a regular review of your systems to, continual monitoring, continual improvement on those things. What's the next thing you'd do?
I would start poking around at the boundaries where systems and networking meet. Okay, you just talked about identity providers, AD. Okay, almost everybody has a DMZ of some sort. Are you letting servers in that DMZ talk out to your domain controllers? Or do you have a read-only domain controller sitting in that DMZ? Or are all your systems in that DMZ just off the domain and doing their own thing? There are valid justifications for most of these scenarios,
Mm-hmm.
but your DMZ systems should almost never be speaking directly into your domain controllers.
Okay.
Not a full read-write one. That gives me the heebie-jeebies. Honestly, I would. How much effort does it take to slap a read-only domain controller in a DMZ?
I mean, there is effort involved, right? Honestly, where the effort comes from is less about getting the domain controller in there than maintaining the domain controller.
Yeah.
Read-only domain controllers are more challenging to maintain than read-write domain controllers, kind of on purpose, right? Like they're just harder to get into and do things with.
Yeah.
That being said, it's not that much harder. If you've got a DMZ and you're not taking advantage of that, then like that's an architectural decision that you need to make. Of course, they're not free. That's the other obstacle, right? Like a lot of companies will look at that and go, okay, there's an extra set of licensing that we don't necessarily need to spend. Like there's other ways.
Yeah.
They look at it as there's other ways to secure that.
I would think that most organizations that would even be thinking about it are kind of at the maturity level where almost everything is virtualized. Mm-hmm. If almost everything is virtualized, you're probably either have enterprise licensing already or are thinking strongly about it. So if your VM infrastructure is already fully licensed as far as Windows go, there's no additional licensing to stand up that additional VM. So that lowers the bar. Yes, it consumes resources.
Right.
But as far as licensing, no. And it's an initial maintenance overhead. Yeah,
sure.
Get it.
So yeah, the edges between networking and systems, honestly, like most systems guys that I know that have functional networking teams are like, oh, well, yeah, that's a networking problem. Right. Although you bring up an interesting point, like one of the really good ways to secure a system in a DMZ is to just not have domain credentials on it.
Yeah.
Obviously you're going to have stuff out there where it needs to potentially talk to some kind of data source, right? If you've got stuff in a DMZ, you need to look long and hard about what kind of write capabilities it has to those data sources. Mm-hmm. Are you securing that well? Are you passing those write operations back through some kind of API where you can add an additional layer of security and, essentially some obstacles to exploits?
Yeah.
Like if your web front end has full read-write capabilities to your back-end business database, you're kind of asking for trouble.
Yeah, you're just waiting for something horrible to happen.
And they're certainly quick, like not passing things through APIs or other intermediary services. Any kind of middleware makes your applications much more performant, potentially. The interesting thing that I thought about when you said systems without domain credentials is, that's fine. If they get exploited, you just tear them down and rebuild them, right?
Yeah.
And that brought me to like one of the modern things, which is containers.
Yeah, container. What do you need to run it on Windows anymore?
Right.
If it's something that you can pull off the domain anyways, probably not.
You can even run Windows containers now, and like, yeah, it's not exactly what people think of when they think of containers, but they, when you talk about the benefits of containers, one of them is some of these aspects of like disposable run, right? Like if something goes wrong with it, I just deploy a new one. I tear that
Who cares? Burn it
faulty one
down.
down, right? The nice thing with containers, like there's no reason to keep a system running, honestly, for more than like a day.
Yeah.
And if you prep your role correctly, you can make sure that your systems um, like aren't alive for more than a couple of hours.
Yeah.
A couple of hours is not long, not long for somebody to try to exploit something. Like it takes a while for exploit kits to get in place and for them to phone home and then for somebody to take action on them. And so like if a system doesn't survive for more than, a couple of hours, that's a pretty hard target to hit. It's not impossible.
Depends on how big the holes are in your code.
Fair enough. Like obviously if it has time to phone home, they then know that like, hey, something at this IP address is potentially exploitable. But there's a lot you can do there too.
Depends on what your code deployment looks like too. Is it an SMB share that everything just reads from? And everything has write access too. So spun up a new instance and wow, it knew to call home, but not your home. The bad guy's home.
I'm going to give you a super specific recommendation from Systems World in the Windows environment. If you are running SMB shares as a method to handle deployment,
horrible.
if you're doing it, do yourself a favor. Spend the like $700 or whatever it is for an additional Windows license. Spin up a Windows DFS server and let it be your share, because DFS is seriously hard to get out of its write or read only mode. You have to beat on it really hard and have the right credentials, and so like you'll save yourself a lot of headaches right there. It becomes your SMB share that you need to be able to write to can suddenly become a lot more secured. It also can make sure that like if something gets exploited, it gets spread around the network automatically. But there's ways to control that stuff.
Yeah.
So do that. If you're not using DFS in your environment and you've got a bunch of shared file structure, set up a DFS server, get it done. It does not take that long. It's not that hard, and it works really well because it's a free product from Microsoft.
Well, now it works pretty well.
Right.
10 years ago, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, fair enough. So, we've tackled the old legacy stuff. We run some best practice analysis. We've touched on the fringes between two different disciplines, and honestly, that applies to systems and developers too, right? Like touch that space.
Yeah, because there's also a new one that's 5 years new, but between networking and cloud regarding ID. So your fancy new cloud IDP, maybe you're doing Azure AD. So a lot of network stuff, you can talk Radius or LDAP. Maybe some stuff will do SAML. If it does SAML, yeah, you're golden. Yeah, you can talk to pretty much anything. Yep. Radius especially is probably more common than LDAP on networking stuff. For a while, so Microsoft realized that this was going to be a problem, and they released a product to be able to allow you to basically do Radius into Azure. Well, into Azure. Then they took it away, and recently they've given it back as a NPS plugin, which is actually better. I'd rather have it right inside of NPS than have an additional server you need to stand up. But now, if you're not using that, say you're using Google as your IDP, how you do Radius to Google? How you do LDAP to Google? Actually, I think I had found a way to do LDAP to Google back.
You can.
Yeah, you can. It's just kind of a pain.
Yeah. I mean, Google will let you, right? They'll let you read LDAP data.
It depends on which workspace plan you have.
Right. But Google's a full SAML shop.
Yeah, and if you can do SAML, so especially, I mean, the most important thing these days, that, well, the largest scope would probably be VPN clients.
Mm-hmm.
So most of those these days, they'll do SAML. It's not really a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But authentication for switches, routers, that kind of stuff, it's almost gotten to the point where, well, you kind of need to do radius, especially for a lot of older stuff. Well, actually, almost everything. Just you almost have to stand up just a standalone silo just for admin credentials. I mean, it's gotten back to that point.
Right. Yeah, and it's an interesting question around radius. Like, it is a technology that's existed for a long time. It's had some updates to it. It does beg the question from hardware vendors: when are you going to provide equal treatment to SAML? Right? When are you
See,
going to allow SAML to take over from radius?
it gets more difficult than that, especially when you're looking at like switches. I'm sorry, switches, wireless.
Mm-hmm.
You pretty much have to use radius.
You think, like, when I think about, say, Meraki with its
Yeah.
heavy cloud integration,
No.
as is.
Yeah, Meraki, you can do GCP
Okay.
authentication like directly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's basically just I'm almost positive you're just doing radius to them, and they're just
Okay.
basically proxying it. Which,
I mean,
fine, as long as there's ways to do that, and there'll always be ways to do stuff like that. But it's how goofy do you want to get? I don't
right.
know. It's been a little while since I've had to do any of this stuff like that. Oh, excuse me. I've been doing almost exclusively security stuff. So last
Right.
couple of years.
Right. Um, so yeah, cloud interface.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, if you can, I don't want to bash on LDAP. Like, it's a useful technology and it serves its purpose, but it's not. It was not built to be secure.
No, but there's because it's semi-secure. There's useful things you can do with it.
Sure.
Like group expansion. So user ID in Palo
Mm-hmm.
Alto land.
Right.
Uh, when you want to expand groups, you just need no group membership. You don't necessarily need to do any authentication over it. You can do authentication over LDAP, but just specifically group expansion, there's not a whole lot of other ways to do that.
Sure.
Not that are easily doable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's go one layer deeper. After you touch on that net cloud interface, looking at like the interface between hardware and identity systems, what's your next thing that you touch on?
For me, not necessarily security, but it's can you still get into all your stuff if the internet's down?
Sure.
Because that's the logical conclusion from the first part of that conversation.
Okay. And like that takes us into kind of a side tangent about how are you vetting your changes?
What I'm saying is, don't be Facebook.
Right. You mean you shouldn't require an angle grinder and like a bolt cutter to get yourself back online if you make one bad configuration change?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, that seems obvious to me. But when you're drinking your own Kool-Aid for too long, you just believe that nothing can ever go wrong. Well, I mean, I kind of part of my job is to believe that everything can always go wrong.
I mean,
How are you going to keep stuff working when everything goes wrong, or at least accessible so you can fix it?
it is an interesting decision that Facebook made in light of, like, we're not that far past the target data breach, right?
Yeah.
Like, HVAC system used as a bridgehead to, like, make, I think, probably the most famous data breach in history.
Oh yeah, yeah. Any of those SCADA systems are always going to be
Right,
the soft underbelly of any organization.
right. But one of the ways that Target or any company could have solved that problem is to not have those systems on their network. And it's very clear, like, as far as Facebook is concerned, maybe they don't have their HVAC system, but they put their like badge access system onto the same network, and like not like VPN tunneled or separately integrated. Like no, just full on integrated with it. And then when that main network went down, so did that system. Um, it it was interesting to see a big company like Facebook have honestly what looked like kind of an amateurish mistake. Um, so, yeah. Well, I think that covered it. Like, if you're wondering how you eat that big old elephant, it really is one bite at a time. And yeah, run best practices analyzers. You're like, well, I've got 700 systems. Where do I start? Pick one. Yeah. Doesn't matter. Pick one. Like you can literally pick your least used, least likely to be exploited system. Heck, if you can find a best practices analyzer for your own management desktop, run it there. Like start somewhere and just keep moving.
So, and one thing that I've always been a huge advocate for is give all your people time in the day or time throughout the week where your job is to find a string and start pulling on it. Yep. That's how you find weird things. That one thing that you never had time to go look into but seemed odd, like I'm not even sure how that's working, or that shouldn't be working, but it is, or it should be working and it's not. You know what? Maybe it's not directly productive to what is on your task list, but at some point somebody's going to need to address it. Start investigating. Figure out what's going on with that. Just keep pulling that string until you find the other end. Maybe you'll get to some roadblock where you need to hand it off to somebody else, but at least then you have a lot of supporting information to make that happen. You can give them something actionable, not just a weird thing that I don't understand happened. You can say, well, I saw this weird thing, so I checked the logs and I saw this doing this, or this is configured to talk to this and it doesn't seem right, or something weird is going on. Give whoever it is ample information to actually go troubleshoot it. Don't just leave those little gremlins hiding out there until they can bite you in the ass.
Right.
Because at some point, something's going to. Or it may be a vector for attack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that concept of being informed, like, yeah, you may think about like, I don't have time to chase those things down.
Make time. You don't have time not to.
Well, maybe you don't. Like, I am sensitive to the real or perceived pressures that I think all of us in operations are under. You may not have time to like actually solve it, but if you start and then say you spend 5 or 10 minutes a day, yeah, it's going to take you forever to like get to the other end of that string, but you'll get there eventually. But if you don't start, you'll never get there. Same thing with the like literally one bite at a time. And if your mouth is small, take a nibble, right? Get started, because until you get started, you're never going to finish. And you may never finish anyway. Like, honestly, you're not going to finish. This is the security landscape. Like, it constantly changing, constantly needing work. But the longer you wait to start, the further you get behind. So, I think you have to start. W2K had the protect your most valuable systems first. I think that's a good place to start. I also have been part of organizations where looking at a valuable system the wrong way could get you in trouble. either from management or just because they were super flaky.
Well, see, this was my response to him. Protect your most vulnerable systems first. They will be the gateway to your most valuable ones.
What I'll tell you is, if you want to get management buy-in, take your most durable systems and start there, right? Because I'm going to run the best practice analyzer on our most valuable system. Management's going to say, well, what impact does that have? Should have none. They don't want to hear should.
Wait, you said should?
Right. If you run it against your most durable system, like, yeah, so I want to run the best practice analyzer against our backup test system. Then we're like, what impact does that have? Well, if that system goes down, none. Right.
And honestly, that's a really good, because if your test systems, hackers don't care if it's your test system or not.
Well, and test systems are notoriously neglected.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, but seriously, find the lowest hanging fruit. And do it, because, well, like, I have found over the course of my career, and I think most people have, that as you pick the low hanging fruit, it's not like a real tree where like the rest of the fruit rises up. No, like the high hanging fruit starts to come down. Maybe it's less about picking low hanging fruit than like building stilts.
Well, and also, so the issues that are on the low hanging fruit a lot of times will also manifest themselves on some of the higher hanging fruit. Right. So when you find something that's, this is something we should do across the board, or this should be fixed on this system, you will find that maybe this is something that should be done across the board. Right. And you'll realize that there are other systems that were previously higher fruit that also need that, which makes their total
the total complexity around them
less, because there's things that you've already discovered about them and already remediated about
them. And also, like, as you work on those things, you develop the first time you do anything, you should be nervous, right? Like, if you've never run it before, I don't know how well Microsoft programmed its best practices analyzer. Maybe they're awful at it. I mean, they frequently are. Maybe it is going to be super resource intensive. But once I know that, once I have the information about it, and then, or maybe it's deploying a patch. Once I know how that's going to go, and maybe have encountered one or two problems with it, I'm way more capable of deploying those things quickly and easily to a more high profile, high risk system, and doing it with confidence. Because when, if I have to tell management it shouldn't have any impact, if I couple that statement with this shouldn't have any impact, and based on our experience so far, this is borne out, or it has this level of impact.
We've already done this on test. We've already done this on dev.
We've have this process nailed down.
Pre-prod.
Right.
We have a pretty good idea that this isn't going to do anything. It's not going to do anything harmful.
Right. And at that point, like, most management is actually kind of happy that you're taking action, right? Like, you're going to actually, like, we're going to make some substantive moves towards being better, being more secure. They're going to be thrilled, particularly if those things are free. And the beauty of basically everything we've discussed here, apart from, like, okay, maybe you got to spend a little bit of Windows licensing in certain situations, it's all free.
Well, it takes time.
It takes time.
Time is money.
Yeah. I don't know about you, Brian, but I have lost sleep over some of these things over the years.
Oh yeah.
I would be happy to give 1 week's equivalent of lost sleep on some of these things for free to my company, in order to not have that particular item be a lost sleep item for the next 51 weeks that year. Like, I will give up that time. And that's the beauty of being an employee. You actually do get to make choice about that. Like, yeah, I'm off the clock. Some employers are going to be super salty about, like, you can't do work off the clock. But if you're salaried, there is no clock, really. And a lot of us are. But yeah, like, take the action.
Well, I don't know about you, but I've never been disappointed about removing a stressor from my life.
Nope.
either professional or personal. So fix it.
Right. Fix it. Your life will get better.
Yeah, your life will get better.
So let's see here. Is there anything else I wanted to touch on with that topic? I hope those of you that are watching or have watched it found that useful. I thought it was an interesting thing, and I thought it was useful to cover.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Let's talk documentation. To jump all over the map.
Oh yeah.
How much time do you think you should spend on documentation in an ideal scenario?
Ideally, it's probably 40% of a project.
Okay.
Realistically, 4% of a project.
No, I hear you. Hey, I've been on projects where 4 is like 4% of the time for documentation. That sounds great. Yeah, I think that would be 40% would be awesome. Like the documentation is going to be great. Trying to think about a project where I've had 40% of the time to work on the documentation.
Yeah, it'll never happen. But I'm saying what it probably would take to do proper documentation on a given project.
Yeah, fully delivered.
Yeah.
Essentially, I delivered this project to completion, and I've now provided you all the information you need to rebuild this if you had to, without having to go through all the same discovery and bad routing that inevitably come. Like you go down inappropriate paths sometimes in projects. Plus, also like giving the somebody who's not an expert in the topic the ability to maintain it. Yeah, 40% is reasonable. I think maybe you could get there
30.
in something as little as 30 or possibly even 20, but not less than that. And I think probably never more than 40%. There's just like the reality is if you're spending 60% of your time on documentation, you're really not talking about project work so much as you are about architecture. And even then, like, implementation is hopefully going to take longer.
Yeah.
In aggregate over time than architecture will.
Yeah. The architecture itself should be relatively simple.
Sure.
For almost anything.
Sure.
But yeah, see, I don't think a majority of that would ever turn into architecture type discussions with documentation.
Sure.
Because you need kind of an overview. You need to know what talks to what and why and when. Mm-hmm. But after that, it should be kind of nuts and bolts.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about
otherwise it's not useful.
Right. I'm thinking about a project where you say you're given a project. In what case would you ever get over that 40% of the project time on documentation? And I can see, like, if it's an architecture project, I can see that being the case. Because honestly, architecture, the end product of an architecture project should be documents, right?
So I could see if this was, say it's the opening phase of what's going to be like a multi-decade kind of project. Like this is going to be a huge, I'd say some federal communications thing where you're building the architecture for something that's going to have to last for many years. So
basically every networking effort ever.
Yeah, pretty much. But it's so then I could understand where most of that front end work would be just architecture. Then I could see how it could be almost entirely architecture, because you need to come up with every scenario, every caveat, how this is going to work, what it's going to look like, even if that initial project just to get things moving is very small.
Sure.
So that's a weird case.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've found that documentation, and I think we've talked about this before, documentation is something that frequently gets left behind. when it comes time for the inevitable dealing with issues, if you're working on documentation, that's the first thing that you're going to sacrifice to the unholy gods of outages, right? Like you're going to stop doing documentation and jump on, and you may not get back to it for a while.
I think worse than having not enough documentation or it's been completely forgotten about is documentation that is not written to the correct target audience.
Sure.
I mean, if these are high level tasks, say for a DBA to actually maintain a system and understand how a system works, and you're writing it like mouse click by mouse click, that is not written to your target audience. If these are standard things to do, just say, do this thing. You're not trying to walk an intern through doing high level tasks.
Right.
But a higher level person needs to understand what needs to be done and why. Not necessarily, yeah, you click on this, you right click on this, you go down to the third option. No, that's useless for anybody that's actually consuming this.
Well, and I think that actually can be one of the traps of documentation is the attempt to speak to multiple audiences. You shouldn't like you. I believe
you may have multiple target audiences,
mm-hmm.
but you don't need to try and speak to all audiences because that's a waste of time
Mm-hmm.
and not appropriate. You're just wasting time. You're putting out bullshit. You're putting out volume over content.
Right. I mean, I firmly believe that if you're, say, you've got multiple target audiences for any given document, you're always going to write to the most simplistic audience, right? Like the lowest level audience, because you have to. If the document speaks to a higher level audience in language that the lower level audience won't understand, that document is no longer for them.
Correct.
Right. But
or you have a procedure run book where it says, do this thing. You can find it on page or chapter subsection of the run book. But even then, should somebody that doesn't have the knowledge of how to do these things be doing these things? Sometimes the answer is yes.
Right.
Sometimes you just need somebody to push a button at 2 a.m. that makes everything all better because somebody put the tooling behind that to make that button do all the magic.
Right. Safely
do the magic.
I guess what I was going to say is that I'm a firm believer in, if you're writing for that, that lowest common denominator audience, you should always provide at least a little bit of information to let that lowest common denominator audience grow. Like you should provide them information. Like if you're a button clicker, do you need to understand like why you're clicking that button? Not really, but should you tell them anyway? If you can spend a sentence on it, yes.
Yeah, give them a couple extra words. Even if it's an end user, give them a couple extra words about what that's actually doing.
If that's half your document, that's a problem. But if it's, if it's, an opening statement, a preamble, like maybe it's the first sentence in a paragraph of like, a 16 paragraph section, like that is all entirely appropriate. Like don't shy away from putting some additional volume in there to let the interested and motivated start to educate themselves. But also don't make it all of your document. What else do you have for pet peeves in documentation or things you like to do?
Like useless screenshots.
Okay.
Or screenshots that are like a full screen.
Okay.
And you can't read anything. Because you're looking at a PDF that somebody took a long time ago.
Right.
Or it's horribly out of date.
Sure.
It's not useful.
Updated documentation, you might say.
Yeah. Documentation should be maintained. It should be treated as a living document. If these systems are being properly maintained and updated, things are going to change. I mean, if you're big enough, have a documentation team that maintains all this stuff. They don't necessarily need to be technically adept, especially at everything that they have to maintain, but they need to know who to talk to and what triggers things to need an update.
Right.
So they'll just be the wranglers, basically a PM of documentation.
Sure.
That can be definitely a useful role.
Yeah. I mean, if your documentation gets out of date, it becomes an obstacle to redundancy, to maintainability. I mean, heck, there's systems that like I knew them like cold, ins and outs all the way 5 years ago. I haven't touched them in 5 years.
Yeah.
If I don't have decent documentation, I'm going to come back to that system and I'm going to have trouble. Well, if that system has been updated since then and that documentation hasn't been updated, now I'm in real trouble.
Or if the underlying line, so not just like visually things have changed or like minor things that might screw up an end user or a help desk person. If the actual product has changed, if the actual, say you have documentation for deploying a server to do X, if that process has changed and you haven't updated your documentation, you're just setting somebody else up to fail because they're going to try and follow that and screw everything up.
Right.
But if you can operationalize yourself out of that, you deploy this golden image.
Sure.
There's a much more in-depth doc about how to maintain that image, but this is the one of how to deploy this. They should almost never change.
Right. Or you should, I mean, honestly, you should have if you're building a golden image, you should have a clear path, or like
how to rebuild it from scratch. This is the exact path.
Or make it clear that, because you know what, I can build a golden image. Most of the people that I've worked with that have significant experience can build a golden image from scratch. Yeah. They don't need a document to tell them how to do it.
Yeah.
There might be some variation in how that gets done, but in general, they're going to make a decent product that's going to provide you a stable platform. That comes back to the thing that's been ringing in my head, like the concept of you must be this tall to ride, right? Like at some point there are tasks that you shouldn't be doing if you don't have the expertise to do.
Yeah.
And I know that like a lot of people are like, well, you know, if the documentation were better.
Yeah, but then you're getting into stuff you shouldn't be touching because you do not have the skill level to do it. Maybe there should be things to, if it's appropriate in that documentation, to give those hints, to allow it, even like an admin or a tech or an engineer, to grow and be able to do that task now because the documentation was good enough to teach them.
Right.
But when you're beyond your technical level, like too far, maybe you just shouldn't be doing it at that point because the danger is too high.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're getting into things where you're taking what appear to be automated actions or simple actions that actually have large repercussions, like when the user falls into the trap of like, well, it's just a checkbox. There's no such thing. Nirvana is not a checkbox away. Hell could be a checkbox away.
Yeah.
But Nirvana is not. And there's totally checkbox that have like really innocuous impact. But there's a ton of them out there that don't. And there's a ton of them like you can check that box and you might think the rollback process is to uncheck the box. No, once you check the box, the repercussion is large. And the rollback is tough.
Some boxes could not be unchecked.
They may appear to be unchecked, but yeah.
It's unusual, but it happens.
One of my pet peeves in documentation is I've actually seen some I was going to say screen captures, screenshots that don't have any explanation around them, but I've seen some very effective pictorial only documentation, right? Like you can convey a lot with a screenshot and a set of arrows.
Yeah, use the arrows, use the boxes.
Yeah, and like maybe some arrows and some numbers. Like if it's a specific, like click here, click here, click here. Like definitely save yourself the image real estate on a document. If you can convey, 6 screenshots worth of information by showing a sequence of operations, it's going to appear and get you to a specific endpoint. Like, go ahead and do it. One of my other pet peeves is thinking because you have a screenshot or because this is like a simple document that you don't have to have decent grammar, or like, no, somebody can read this at some point.
Well, and just because that screenshot makes sense to you,
right,
doesn't mean it makes sense to somebody else. How'd you get there?
mm-hmm.
Are your preceding steps there? Why are you there? What are you trying to accomplish?
Right.
What precisely are you supposed to do within that dialogue or whatever?
True.
And that goes into the marking up of the screenshot
mm-hmm.
with your arrows and boxes and text and the accompanying explanation. Don't just have a series of screenshots and expect people to be able to follow along. Some skill levels will. Right. Somebody that already basically knows what to do, or that may be your personal shortcuts to kind of know what to do in a graphical environment when you need to repeat a process exactly. A couple of screenshots, you've been through it before, you know what they look like. That's a different type of documentation. When the target audience is yourself, yeah, you can shorthand it. You can kind of mail that one in.
Sure. Or if you are training people to do a process, like providing them a pictorial flow to act as their memory aid after training, because you get trained on something, maybe you get to drive and do it once or twice, but then maybe you don't touch that for another 3 months. Having that pictorial guide will often be good enough to get you back there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of actually taking the time to make documents more complex if you can. Like, go ahead and insert tables and like align text around imaging and label things well, maybe provide citations, provide references. Good documentation has that stuff in it. Yeah. And man, when I love good documentation. I don't like a lot of extra language and stuff because I'm just as impatient as everybody else.
You don't want it to be like a recipe on the internet. You don't want to know their whole life story or what their kids ate for breakfast that morning. I just want
recipe
the
bloggers,
recipe.
You will increase your site traffic by putting the recipe at the top.
So do you? Well, yes, but do you know why they do that?
I do.
It's just a copyright thing, because you can't copyright a recipe. A recipe is a set of instructions. That's not copyrightable. But once you get a story around it, that makes that particular post copyrightable, so that other sites can't just wholesale steal everything.
Right.
They could still steal the recipe, but it takes a little extra effort. So,
yeah. But not that much.
Well, no, not that much.
Like, the thing is, what's better? Copyrightable content that you can defend, or more clicks through to your site? I think ultimately more clicks through to your site is way more valuable, even if they only encounter the top ad on your site. Right? Like, I'll tell you what, cooking sites that deliver me the recipe at the top, I will return to and look for more recipes there, because you know what? I'm going to get the recipe. When I'm looking for a recipe, I'm not looking for somebody's life story. If I find the cook that has provided me like 3 or 4 good recipes, maybe I'm interested in your life story now. Like, who is this person?
Or what I've seen pretty often recently is the list of ingredients with amounts will be real high up, and then 10 pages down is the actual directions. So you have to keep scrolling up and down and up and down and up and down. Now add the flour.
Uh-huh.
Well, how much was that again? Unless you prepped everything, you need to keep going back and forth. Why not? So the compromise is either, put the amounts down with the rest of the recipe, or write in the written recipe add a cup and a half of flour.
Right.
Then I don't need to go keep scrolling up to the top and looking at it again. It's just,
Well, so my other issue with those things is their pages are frequently horribly structured. So like I know that I want to go straight to the bottom. But the site is set up like
jump
most
to recipe.
Yeah. Like just take
good
me
ones
there.
have a button like that.
and make sure that content renders first. Like, yeah, normally you wouldn't render the bottom of the page first, but in this case, like, go ahead and do it. I really don't care about your advertisements.
There we go.
I care about your recipe. I don't care about your ad revenue. I appreciate that you're getting ad revenue. I'm not going to take that away from you, but understand that what I'm there for is the recipe, and you'd better give it to me, or I'm not going to continue to give my ad revenue to you. Like, you want my eyeballs? Give me the product that I'm looking for.
Yep.
That's why I don't watch over-the-air TV anymore. You want my eyeballs? Give me content in a way that I want to consume it. I can't stand to watch over-the-air TV. I have a free Hulu subscription, right? With my phone plan. Got Hulu for free. Do you know how often I watch Hulu? Almost never, because there are ads on it, and they annoy the crap out of me.
Yeah, that I made my wife get a paid Hulu because we were watching something, and they would drop the ads in the middle of a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nope, either cancel it or pay for no ads because this is stupid.
Prime has started to drop it into content now too. Like, there's stuff that, and I think they got I would imagine they got a pretty severe backlash on that. So now, like, they'll show you stuff like, hey, this is free with ads.
Yeah.
I never watch something that's free with ads.
Just disclose it. Well, I never watch anything on Prime anyways. I've had Prime for the last decade. Well, more than that. Jeez.
There's a couple of things on there. The one thing I will say that.
So there's content that's only on Prime. Mm-hmm. I will not watch it because their user interface sucks. Fair enough. I think we've even talked about this before. Yeah, it's
there's some content on there. Their user interface has gotten a little better, but I just think that you, for some content, it's worth it. Like, The Expanse is on Prime. It's a great series, and I think worth watching. And I'll suffer through it once you get it started. Now, Prime has solved some of their like multi-season issues.
Okay.
But yeah, like anything that's got ad content, and I'm like, nope. Like, oh yeah, I totally wanted to watch that. Oh, it's got ads. Guess I didn't want to watch it. So, hello, Amber.
Hello, Amber.
Welcome to the show. If you have questions, put them out there.
Yep. We'll be glad to help, or not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much help will be, but we'll certainly try.
So, speaking of documentation and content, that makes me think about diagrams. Sure. So I used to be big about Visio, and I would make all kinds of very beautiful diagrams.
I love your diagrams.
I think my diagrams got way better when I stopped using Visio and started using squares and circles and
like
Draw.io. So, or diagrams.net now. Free diagramming software. It's very simplistic.
Sure.
You can make it, you can have little 3D objects and all that. You can make it look pretty much like a Visio. And you can import Visios. But I think when I stopped worrying about how pretty it was, I worried about content above all others and readability. Instead of being pretty, make it readable and ingestible. Have a high density of information that is absorbable at several different levels. So you can look at the diagram as a whole, and that gives you information.
Mm-hmm.
You can look in a little bit closer and start looking at maybe network that are notated, or different domains that are notated, and that gives you more information. You look a little bit closer, and now you see individual interface names and IP addresses,
Sure.
which gives you even more information. But at each of these levels, none of them really take away from the other levels, and they all have appropriate information and useful information.
Yeah. Assuming you can do that without getting crowded
Yes.
or cluttered to the point where you start to, like, say you got a high level document about interconnectivity. You can put some of those lower levels in there, and it's absolutely useful, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as that lower level of content starts to make it so crowded that you can't convey the higher level stuff anymore, it becomes not useful.
Absolutely agree.
Um,
Appropriate uses of colors.
mm-hmm.
Drop shadows and all the craziness. Just I honestly think that helped my diagramming a lot. It's just
Right.
keeping it simple.
You should let that comment.
Oh yeah.
And yes, thank you.
Yes.
Is one of many.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Buy Bitcoin and Ethereum. I mean,
I can make you a millionaire pretty easy. Like you can, if you buy, Argentinian currency, pretty easy to become a millionaire.
Well,
or did you mean a millionaire in US dollar terms? Because that can be more challenging.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So I will say that with my kids, I'm slightly more tolerant of commercials, mostly because there's content that they absolutely want to watch, and I do not want to be, I don't want the screaming fit of them not being able to watch that thing just because there's an ad. Although I won't let them, if I find that there's a lot of ad content or ad content that creates more problems for me, I won't watch it. Like if you're advertising toys or candy to my children,
I don't think you even realize how brainwashed these kids are getting.
Oh, I do.
588-2300 Empire.
Yeah. No, I know.
Yeah. Because that was the thing when we were kids, and they played that ad every 10 minutes, doesn't matter what show it was.
Mm-hmm.
It spammed us constantly as kids.
Right.
Anyone in the Midwest. And now they're nationwide.
Right.
I haven't seen an ad in forever in general, let alone theirs, but I'm sure they're doing the same thing.
They are.
But they do it because it's effective. It was just a simple jingle.
Yep.
And it burns it in your brain. We all know what that phone number is.
Put that comment up. So I have young kids, 3 and 5. My son knows that the word for moving forward quickly is fast forward. But because he's never had to rewind something, he refers to that operation as fast backward.
Which is very accurate.
It's entirely accurate. The first time he said, "Mommy, go fast backward." We knew exactly what he meant and thought it was hilarious. And he's like, what do you mean there's another word for it? Of course it's fast backward.
Emergency TV service. Yeah.
Or more recently, call 1-800 the General now.
Oh, yeah. They play those on Hulu, I know. That's probably the most recent time I've seen ads.
Yeah. I will tolerate some ads, like if the platform wants to advertise other content for, 3 to 10 seconds. If it's an engaging advertisement the first time, I might watch a 30-second ad spot for like a new series or something like that. Like I don't mind a preview,
hell of a spot, yeah.
Right? But if you're showing me the same ad over and over, you had better let me skip over that. Otherwise, I'm not watching you anymore.
Yeah.
Also, when it comes to things that hit kids' brains, the most insidious thing out there today is package opening videos.
I've heard about that. My kids are way too old to know what that's all about.
So there's a kid out there now. He and his family have become famous and have an actual TV series, Ryan's Mystery Playdate, Ryan and his family started out doing package opening videos, and while their package opening videos were definitely not the worst of the breed, they were definitely like the gateway to a ton of other package opening videos and other like endorphin hit crack for small children. I actually still have a standing rule that we do not watch Ryan's Mystery Playdate because I will not reward that behavior, right? Like, I understand that that's how you got famous and how you made your money, and now you're providing other content, but the root of the poison tree, man, I won't reward their behavior. So
yeah,
feel free to take that stance if you'd like to as well.
I would tend to agree just because I know how that kind of stuff can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. And the algorithms got it figured out too. Like, they will deliver the most clickable, addicting stuff, and there's a ton of people that are not watching what their kids are consuming. I will readily admit that I do not always watch as closely as I should, though we have absolutely trained our son, or he has the wherewithal to check in with us before he consumes new content. Like, even on Netflix, on kids' Netflix, he will come in before he starts a series. He'll come and say, is it okay if I watch this? Our daughter is a little more devil may care and less prone to that.
Well, she's a redhead.
Yeah. So we'll see how that pans out. But it's been interesting to see their ability to consume media and interact with technology as well. Like, I know that kids are as adaptable and quick learning as they are. It's unsurprising that they're super skilled with technology. I try to make sure that my kids continue to learn things beyond just like the basic level. But yeah, they interact with technology way different than I do. Like, my son figured out how to do some stuff on the iPad. No, I'm not a seasoned Apple user. I try not to use the products. But he found some stuff on there. I'm like, how did you do that?
Man, you poke around, you explore.
Right.
That's how kids learn about the universe.
It is. It is.
It makes sense that that's how they would explore technology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the same way I still do it. I mean, new product? All right. I'm just going to start clicking around and see what happens.
Ooh,
cause and effect. Hey, well, I mean, don't change anything, but
when you click this button, the smoke comes out.
Yeah, don't click that again. Mental note. I mean, now I need a Post-it or something to remember, but
fair enough. I'm actually looking forward to the day where I have to educate my children about the fact that once that OEM smoke gets out, you can't get it back in.
Yeah, that's that magic OEM smoke. You can't get that just anywhere. There's only like one factory in China that makes that stuff,
right?
And you export restricted. Yeah, once they put it
constant supply problems.
You let it out, it never goes back in.
That's right. Yeah. All right, folks. What else? Give us other useful and annoying things to talk about.
Yeah, we were supposed to have Richard join us, but he's having a thing.
I mean, that happens.
Yeah.
I need a drink break. So I'm, I don't want to hang you out to dry, but
no, that's fine. We lost focus. There we go.
Let's see if we can do it again.
Well, because it's face tracking, so if both of our faces are obscured at the same time, it kind of freaks out a little bit. Yeah.
Sorry, my ADD's coming through hard.
Yeah.
Also, I want to do this.
Oh.
No, our logo.
Oh yeah, that's excellent.
All right, I'm gonna get something else in a cup. I'll be back.
Yeah, I just still got a little bit. I could use water, but hold on. Let me see. Got a couple of messages. Make sure. What was that? I got a bloop from somewhere. I don't know where it's. A bloop.
The bloop.
I don't believe it's anything stream related. No. So, anyways, we've been starting to think about some pre-recorded content. Oh, that was Richard coming on. Let me bring him on. But hey, Rick, how you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Oh, good. Whoop. See, this layout isn't gonna work. Let's do this. So let's no, that ain't gonna work. Oh crap. let's do that. So as I was about to say, we're starting to think about doing some of the pre-recorded content because there are specific topics that we want to cover more in depth, closer to scripted, but not quite. Just like actual in-depth topics that we want to sit down and talk about without distractions or idiocy.
Right.
So I know one of my big ones is naming and numbering conventions, and so we have some ideas about how to present that and how to do that.
Yeah, I think we'll probably try to get that done in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, because that'll be a little bit bigger thing, but that'll be a pre-recorded. Even if we ended up doing it on Restream or whatever, it'll basically be a pre-recorded thing, not really a live stream. So we have a little more control over it. So.
Right. Yeah.
So, but yeah, now we got Rick on.
Yeah, welcome, Rick.
How you been? How's the Logic treating you?
Yay.
Yeah.
Well, we added a VDOM and some other networks, and we moved stuff from one network to another, and they were attached to the alert logic in the previous VDOM, and there's serial numbers involved, so stuff has to be done and created and uninstalled and reinstalled, and yeah, it's kind of silly, but it is what it has to get working.
Yep. So what else is new besides that? How things been? How's the wife? How the kid? Yeah. Dogs, kids, whatever.
Dogs, kids.
How's the wife? How's the dogs? How's the kid?
We are actually
the kid that you know of.
Yeah, the kid that I know of.
Now that we're coming out of the sick phase, and we're all doing fairly well. Last weekend we were out and about. This weekend we were out and about. Went to some antique stores and stuff last weekend, and whatever. Got a new radio. That was kind of fun. I showed that to you last week. And
find yourself a newer Rick.
She's looking. So, and this week's was good. Got a lot more work handed to me, and so yeah.
Because you weren't already swamped.
Yep, we're pushing out CyberArk for a PAM solution as well as MFA, which will actually be kind of nice because the what we're using now is a bit antiquated, and so we need to step up on that. And I like the idea of a PAM solution instead of so it's admin privileges on demand, and I kind of like that because I don't have to keep track of two separate user accounts, an admin account and a standard user account. So the PAM solution I'm looking forward to because they make a lot of sense. I know it's kind of a pain in the butt administration wise to get it all set up and going and whatever, but I mean, in the world we live in, it's I think it's appropriate. So I kind of like it.
Yeah.
So far we haven't done anything with it yet. We're still trying to get the kickoff meeting kicked off with some engineering people. So instead of salespeople. So there's that.
Yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road, where you find out just how honest the salespeople were. I mean, they're never completely honest. Sometimes not through their own fault, but like.
Well, I mean, did you do a proof of concept?
You're funny.
Well, if you didn't do a proof of concept, everything is self-induced.
You're absolutely right.
You can't blame the sales guy if you didn't, because any vendor will gladly let you try their product.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Almost any vendor. And any vendor that actually thinks that their product is good,
yes,
will let you use their product for 30, 60, maybe 90 days. And you
I
can
don't
do a
doubt that
small
a bit.
implementation.
I don't doubt that a bit. The problem is that our group was not involved in the selection or procurement process.
So the wrong people in the room. Yeah, the wrong people in the roomatitis.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about wrong people in the room.
I can talk
I
about
will
that for
say-
days.
I will say that if you don't have a technical operations person in the room before for some conversation late in the process before you sign on the dotted line to buy a product, you have made a mistake. Like, I don't care what the product is. You should have a technical operations person in the room because they're the only people that are going to ask certain questions that are super important.
Okay, so I disagree 100% because they should have been in the very beginning of the process. So,
okay,
a lot of organizations,
I guess, as you know, I live in the tyranny of awful.
yes.
So I think about, like, what's the minimally viable solution?
Yes.
And minimally viable solution is a technical operations person in the room somewhere towards the end of the process before you sign on the dotted line. And they should have, if not veto power, at least you should give really careful consideration to what they do. Now, if you don't want to waste all the time of all the pre-sales meetings and all that stuff, like, because frequently, like, oh, well, we put like 70 hours into vetting this product and like now you're telling us we can't use it. Well, we're going to do it.
You wasted your own time.
Right. Have them in the room earlier.
Stop bringing solutions to architects. Bring a problem to an architect, and they will present possible ways to. This is our new rescue, Ziggy, and he is
Ziggy.
Rambunctious. He is an aggressive lover.
How old is Ziggy?
He approximately going on 2.
Oh boy, yeah. So he's
lay down.
Hey, wild man.
That's awesome.
I know. Well, he's giving me hugs, Brian.
I know.
So,
hugs.
Chris, you and I work in the same neighborhood, I think. I mean, yeah, we get a lot of that.
I've worked.
We stopped getting invited to the party because we were like, hey, you got to think of these things, and nobody wanted to actually talk about things.
Well, nobody wants to hear, no, that's a stupid solution.
Yeah. Well,
they don't even want to hear.
I don't think we ever actually.
They were unqualified to pick that solution in the first place.
Right.
Don't bring a solution to your architects, your engineers. No, that their job is to come up with solutions. Bring them a problem.
Right.
And they will solve it in a way that works with the rest of the environment.
Right.
Not just, oh, I saw an ad in the back of a whatever.
You know what?
I was at a conference and these people had a real slick booth. So I signed on the dotted line. How many times has that happened?
You can have that conversation. You can say, I was at a conference and these people had what I thought was a really slick solution. Let's look at them.
Yeah. Here, could you check this out? Tell me if this is BS or not.
Right.
That's what the people are there for.
I've had vendors brought to the table to me by people that are not technical and gone, thanks. Like, you just saved me a ton of work, right? Like, this is a great, like, yeah, we got some work to do on implementation, but like, this is a unique, innovative product. Let's run. But
it's also, there's been,
oh yeah.
Who are these effing clowns?
Wait, we did what now?
In 1996, I was working for a company that was starting to get shook up over the Y2K issue because they had some VAXs and some other things that, while the VAX itself could roll over, the ERP, the manufacturing ERP system that they couldn't, which we later found out could. So the director of IS, we didn't have really an IT department. They had an IS, and then we had a couple of computer guys that would run around and whatever. He went to a seminar for Oracle and said, we need to do a couple of things. And they said, yeah, we can do that. So he just bought the entire Oracle suite, all of it. The whole kit
for all of the money. I'm sure they cashed that check real quick.
Yeah, it was a lot of money and bought it. and we didn't actually get it implemented until sometime in 1998ish, 1999. So it's not like
2 years for an
ramped up.
ERP implementation isn't that horrible.
No, it's not. But there's a ton of customers, and I found out that they were like, well, we weren't planning on using it for this and for that and whatever, but since we bought the whole kit and caboodle and the kit, they decided to use it for, order to cash, work in progress, the whole 9 yards. They used it for all of it and had to customize it heavily for the nature of the business.
I think there's a case to be made if for some reason you sign on the dotted line for a big omnibus product like that, whether you should or not, it behooves whatever teams are involved to evaluate that product as a possible fit for their work. Like, okay, we own this now. Can we use it? But I also think that, like, part of that conversation has to be, okay, yeah, it's a competing product, but it doesn't work for us because, like, we'd have to do 2 years of customization. By the time you do 2 years of customization, your labor costs are so crazy that you may as well have stuck with your existing product or a different one, or like.
Well, when it comes to ERP implementations, I think every company does way more customization than they ever should.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a lot of things that are basically standard business practices. Don't be a unicorn. Do it in a standard way. You'll save yourself a lot of money. There's probably a reason that every other company in the world does it this way, except for you. Do you really need a $10 million add-on to SAP to do your unicorn process because Barb in accounting wants to do it that way?
Because that's how
they've always did it. Because she started doing it 30 years ago like that on note cards, and you need to replicate that process.
Right.
No, that's stupid. Sometimes you maybe need to update your business practices. Maybe your processes aren't as good as you think they are.
So, by the way, the only Barb that I've ever known in accounting was actually great and not prone to that. Full disclaimer, Barbs in accounting are not necessarily problematic.
I was trying to think.
You didn't work with Barb at a particular restaurant organization. Okay,
I'm saying
that Barb is a huge pain in the ass. So
fair enough.
Sometimes they are. Some are lovely ladies.
So I did work for a company a few years later after that, where their financial system, how they paid their employees, was a custom written kind of thing that ran on a VAX. And I'm like, and we had to get rid of it because there was no support. There was nothing on it. It was old ancient hardware.
It's like, payroll. Every company does payroll. Do it in a standard way.
Right. Well, because it was a union thing and they had to pay. It was incentive pay and this, and they had this all figured. I'm like, why don't we find out how that's written and reverse engineer it and write it in like a modern language?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we can't do that. So I had to find an emulation program called Share and Vax in like VMware. It did it on an emulator on a server. So it was crazy. So people like you say, Brian, hey man.
That's why every ERP implementation takes twice as long as promised and
it works half as well as you thought.
Way over budget and works half as well as was promised. Yeah.
Well, and then it's also why they get so long in the tooth, right? Like if you're going to have to spend 2 years every time you do an update, of course you're not going to update it.
Get into standard procedures and you'll save yourself a lot. There are definitely businesses that have to do weird stuff.
Then you get your companies that don't do any kind of ERP. Nothing.
Yeah.
And then they wonder why they don't know what they're doing half the time.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. So yeah, Chris, we live in the same neighborhood, buddy.
I mean, we're both systems guys. Or started out as systems guys, right? Like
that's where my heart is.
That systems world it's messy, it's ugly, and you know what I'll say? The problems are always interesting. They might not be nice, I may not like them, but they're at least interesting. I do enjoy going to my job every day and truly not knowing what I'm going to do. Like I have some things in mind that I might be doing, but no guarantees. No guarantees.
For the last 3.5 years, Well, actually, yeah, the last 3 years or so, I've known exactly what I wanted to do when I got there, but
It almost
it
never happened.
rarely ever works out that way. And
The universe had other plans.
Brian's he's witnessed it many times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've said for a long time, like I go into like I try to set myself a set of like 3 to 5 goals, like key tasks that need to get done for a week, and I consider myself to have had a productive week if I get to 2 of them. And that's not saying that like I only accomplish 2 productive tasks a week. I'm just saying like if I can manage to avoid enough noise to get 2 pre-planned tasks done, I count myself lucky.
Yeah, that's a win a lot of the time.
That is, yeah.
And like
absolutely a win.
Well, because so much stuff happens.
You jump on the computer and start working at 9 o'clock at night on a Sunday to try to get as much of it done before you go to work the next day because you know you're going to get interrupted.
Yeah.
Right. Or you find yourself at 4 o'clock on a Friday and you're like, no one is bugging me. And I don't have to be anywhere. So I'm having a date with my computer tonight. I'm going to spend 3 hours and actually dig into something that has needed to be worked on. That time is invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I probably get more work done after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, any given day of the week. You need between 4 and 8, and 4 and 8 p.m. I get much more work done than
Rick's always done his best work at night.
Yes, that's me.
But you're both chronically understaffed.
Yep.
And that's what happens.
I mean,
Rick, you should have 3 people doing your job.
I don't know.
No surprise.
Really
there should be 3 people doing your job.
I think 2 people. I could use an admin.
There should be 3 people doing your job.
But I think though that if they had a security engineer doing the security engineer stuff that I have to do, the alert logic, the CyberArk, all those other things that I do, then I could spend a lot more time doing what I do and have help with an admin. I think I'd be fine. I really do. So
yeah, that's 3 people.
I was like, I'm doing
a security guy plus you, and then plus an admin on the network side. Yeah, that.
So, but it's all good. So
no,
yeah.
I hear you, Rick. And the thing is, like, when IT leadership looks at the IT teams, the least sexy, the one that appears to be the least productive, like the one that's contributing the least new, is always operations. But I will tell you that in general, operations staff are way better at cutting cost or controlling cost. Like when you think about IT as a force multiplier, you can't live without developers. Fully embrace the idea of having developers on staff. But if you are in a situation where your balance between operations and development is such like it's like 10 to 1, 20 to 1, you've got a problem, because those developers create things and they need to be maintained. And if they're not maintained well, they're going to get more and more expensive over time. So, yeah, I think that most operations teams are understaffed, even well-staffed ones, like what we all might think of as like well-staffed. Like, hey, Rick, if you had a security engineer and an admin, you'd get the stuff done, right? But imagine if you had...
I probably would be able to get down to 45 hours a week.
Right. But imagine if you had 2 security engineers, a senior level person under you, and an admin, right? Like now I've gone to 5, but how much extra breathing room would you have? And how much time would you have to actually stay ahead of the tech curve, to actually think about problems? And like when you showed up to a meeting, you would have had time to maybe prep for 30 minutes, right? Like all of those things that other departments are like, well, of course you prep for a meeting. 30 minutes? No, I need like 2 hours to prep for my marketing meeting, right? Like what are you going to talk about? Well, we're talking about color schemes. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Are you the one picking the costume? No, I'm going to review what other people have done. So you need 2 hours? Like I'm not saying that happens, but like I've heard conversations from other teams like that. And I'm like, okay. Like I'd love to have that luxury. We'd make way better decisions.
Well, I mean, Rick, when's the last time you updated your switches or routers or?
Yeah, that's actually been.
How many CVs are outstanding on your stuff?
I couldn't tell
You'd
you.
Have to scan to know.
We're not scanning, so yeah, that's.
Well, oh jeez. What?
Hi, Ziggy.
Hey, Ziggy.
All right, lay down.
Yeah,
but you're right. It's been a poem for quite a while.
Bringing the leash because he wants to go outside, even though he was just outside. Come on, go up with Mama.
Go on.
I've been tasked with, getting some kind of system in place that will monitor and check and whatever to do these. But I mean, we've got our environment set up in such a way that updating a switch involves an outage, which is kind of a problem. Yeah. I've got some Cisco Nexus switches that don't fall into that, but I'm not all the way there yet.
Yeah. Well, at least that you can do left side, right side, A side, B side.
Those things, with the latest upgrade that I did on those
go by Mama
before they went fully into production and got them up to the level of OS that they need to be able to do that.
Come on. It's fine. Come on.
Ziggy.
Ziggy.
Right in the mic. Right. You should talk right into the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, right into the mic. Puppies.
Hey, you can come lay right here. You can lay here and be cute. You can lay down, but you gotta lay down. Yeah, we don't need the leash.
Take me outside.
Yeah. Oh God, he's so excited.
You want to argue for it? Oh yeah. IT ops and puppies.
There you go.
We got a winning combination, Brian.
Yeah.
Like it was all right until an hour 30 in, and then the dog came on screen, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Oh yeah.
It's between you. What's going to happen? It's going down.
Oh God. Oh jeez.
All right.
That's awesome.
Good boy.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and bounce. Geez. I wanted to show up and participate.
Hey man,
we appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. I actually want to snuggle up on the couch and watch some television with the wife because she's in a good mood and I want to keep her that way.
Oh, good. Yeah. Happy wife, happy life.
Indeed. So happy spouse, happy house, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let me know what if you guys want to do some pre-broadcast,
pre-recorded,
stuff. Yeah, let me know. I'd love to be involved in some of that. And
we have a handful of topics we want to cover. Just kind of, especially something like naming and numbering is something that's both Chris and my pet peeve.
Yep.
And it's one of those things where there's not necessarily a right and wrong. There's many right ways to do it, but there's also many wrong ways to do it. So there's kind of a corridor of correctness. So it's how do we present that in a cogent manner?
You and I actually came up with some naming standards that have followed me around for quite a while now. And
the previous ones at the place you are at are awful. The previous ones.
Oh yeah, with
let's put 9 consecutive zeros in the middle of a server name. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, no.
What? Why?
Those were.
Or was it 10? I don't know. It was a lot,
it was 4.
God.
It
wasn't 4.
Yeah.
Bull.
Oh,
it was enough where you can't count it by sight, and you have to kind of space it out with your mouse. Because I ran across servers where there was 1 missing 0.
Yeah, there was.
You still have some of that stuff floating around.
We do, but
they were using the full
that
job
has
number.
A 9 character. Nothing at 5 at the most zeros. But I don't remember seeing any that had 5 zeros. But yeah,
even 5 is ridiculous. But you have more than that.
They were customer like job numbers and whatever. And yeah, it was kind of, I'm like, that's how you're naming a server? I mean, it should be by location,
why?
what it does, and then how many in a row it is. And
Yeah.
So, and then if you want to throw in whether it's physical or virtual, although
Yeah,
really
things that are
doesn't
nice to know, things that are important to know at a glance from the name. Where is it? Approximately what it does. Things like, is it physical or virtual? Those are important things to be able to tell just by glancing at a server name,
Right.
or a device name, whatever.
It's really funny because I work with a DBA that says none of that stuff's important. They should be obfuscated so nobody knows what that server is.
No, that's stupid.
It's totally behind that. And well, that person doesn't care because that person is a SQL DBA. They
have never have to deal with it.
why we would do a naming convention. So
okay, well he can name all his tables like GUIDs.
I work with a SQL DBA that doesn't object to good naming.
Yeah.
Because
I've thought for a couple of times for several years about trying to steal him away from there, but I don't think he'd go.
Like a lot of us old hands, we don't really like to move. It's a pain.
It is a pain.
It is.
It is truly a pain. And sometimes you just got to go, man.
Sometimes your hand gets forced and
yep.
it turns out way better.
Mm-hmm.
At least for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amber, if you're still watching, sometimes the way to become rich like Brian is like to have your hand forced and find out that like you're worth way more than you were being paid.
Yeah. 2 or 3 times more than what you were being paid. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, working 2 days a week and making twice as much. I'll take it.
Yeah, I'm fucking thrilled for you. Pardon my language, but yeah.
Well,
no, I think everybody that knows you is
different work.
Actually, honest to God, I am thrilled for you. Because right. I mean, you've worked hard. You do good work, and to be recognized and appreciated and actually compensated for your knowledge and what you do is a good thing. And hopefully someday Chris and I will both be.
Right. It gives the rest of us hope, Brian.
Yeah.
It gives us hope.
Right. Don't blow it, Brian. Do not blow it.
Yeah. I'm having a very session today. I've been trying to evict the from my vocabulary, but I'm also trying to evict like dead air from these. So my personal tics tend towards the ums.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have a heavily scheduled
no, we didn't.
Schedule.
No. I mean, we typically don't.
Yeah, we typically don't.
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot that happened in the last week.
I mean, come on, internet companies, have an outage.
Yeah.
Oh, I had another Spectrum outage today,
Catherine.
Kids.
Next time that Chris is not on site, we'll have you on.
Absolutely.
Then you can sit at your in your office, and I can sit in mine.
Perfect. And Ziggy will be happy sitting next to one of you.
Yeah, he'll lay in the bed in my
Ziggy
office.
Ziggy can come to my house.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Edgar will teach you how bad cats really can be.
Have a good show, boys.
Bye, Rick.
Right,
take it easy.
Talk to you later.
Yeah, I have a large, violent cat that does not like dogs.
Don't your leash. That's not even your leash.
I'm pretty sure Ziggy would learn a few things about just how dangerous cats are.
Oh God, I know.
All right, but yes, Katie, we will definitely want to have you on at some point, because, like, interestingly enough, I think you and I might be some of the few people in our circle that actually have retail IT experience, and the horror stories are epic.
I believe it.
I never got called into court, but I'm sure I came close a couple of times. And that's not the worst of it.
How you doing, buddy? Oh God, I know.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we.
I think Ziggy's demanding we.
I think Ziggy's has communicated adequately that we're done for tonight.
Oh, poor
Well,
Ziggy.
thank you all for joining us, and we will see you again next week.
Yeah.
All right.
Next week, same bat time, same bat channel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we've kind of
We've tapped
settled
out.
into well, Sundays at 8
8.
is seems to be a good time. I mean,
Works for us anyway.
yeah, and I mean, we thought about it as people have been on call or just doing whatever and having family life to deal with. It seemed like this is kind of the wind down to the week. And
Yeah. I
there's
mean, it's
kind of
not
a
perfect,
lull.
right?
There's not a whole lot else going on a Sunday night.
Yeah. My beautiful, lovely, amazing wife has been rock solid about supporting our family while I do this, and like I can't thank her enough. So if you ever meet her or know her, send her a message saying, "Hey, thanks for participating, because I couldn't do this without her." The ability to get on sometimes when the children are still awake is a big deal. So, but yeah, Sundays at 8.
Yeah, we've kind of kicked around doing a second show during the week, but that's down the road when because really a show of this format kind of thrives on the interaction.
Right.
So, I mean, we can cover a bit by ourselves.
That's Brian's shameless plug for Tell Your Friends.
Yeah, well, it's hey, if you want to come on and talk, I mean, that's what makes this interesting. Or just questions. Throw out a question in the comments.
And even if it's not like super technical, like say you're an end user and you're like, why does my IT department do this? Ask.
Oh,
because
yeah.
odds are we know the answer.
Yeah, it may not be intuitive, but we probably know why they're doing whatever it is that's annoying you.
Why can't I get to Facebook? I can tell you why you can't get to Facebook. Or I can get to YouTube, but I can get nowhere else on the internet. I know that answer too. But yeah. So tell your friends. Come on. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and have a good night.
Yeah, have a good night. We'll see you guys in a week. Bye-bye.